All right. Well, appreciate everybody coming to my talk. It's interesting. I just got back from Hawaii last night at 9:00 p.m. I was at ShakaCon, which it's a conference out in Oahu, Hawaii, and everybody's like, "Oh, I can't believe you're out in Hawaii. That must have been awesome." Well, if you ever are busy or run into a business and it's a 6-hour time difference, or you're in China or something, you're up at 2:00 in the morning, and then you go to bed because you're done partying at 1:00 in the morning. So you do that for 3 days, and afterwards you feel like you've aged about 30 years. So I got home yesterday at 9:00, and then fortunately, I guess, had friends come over until 1 a.m. So I haven't slept in like 4 days. So if I start just going into some weird tangent, it's because I'm hallucinating. So I appreciate you can get me out of that hallucination real quick. That'd be great. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Dave Kennedy. This is actually a day at the office. We had a new guy start, Justin Elzy. He came from Akivant and came over to the TrustedSec side. And we all decided to dress up in superhero outfits or different various outfits. I actually had taken mine off at this point in time. But I'm insanely scared of clowns. I have a really bad fear of clowns. And so our one guy decided to dress up as a horrible, awful-looking clown. And it's horrible when you're driving and then you look to your left and there's a clown sitting there smiling at you. You know, it's the most messed up thing you've ever seen in your entire life. But that was a good day. But I'm the CEO of TrustedSec and Binary Defense Systems. I started those companies a number of years ago. I was a chief security officer at Diebold for a number of years. I've done a few things in front of Congress and been on the news a few times. I wrote the Social Engineer Toolkit, and I actually just released a new version of SET yesterday, which I'll talk about. And then I also wrote a few other tools like Fast Track, Artillery, some exploits, stuff like that. Co-author of Metasploit the Penetration Tester's Guide. I was a Marine deployed to Iraq a few times. In fact, what? Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you. Hoorah. I was actually just back. That's where I was stationed. That was in Hawaii. So I actually got to go see a lot of my old Marine buddies on base and everything. And it's funny when you get out, you're like a corporal or sergeant or whatever. I came back and all my friends are like colonels now and master sergeants. It's like the weirdest thing. I'm like, yes, master sergeant, and my friends. But and then I also started DerbyCon with the few other folks, Adrian and Martin and those guys. So also started DerbyCon a few years ago. Yay, DerbyCon. So this talk, the way I kind of made, and this is actually what I just gave at ShakaCon yesterday or 2 days ago. But the reason I wanted to give this talk is kind of talking about where we're at as far as attackers and kind of the necessity of trying to do different types of attacks to understand, what protections we have around companies to make yourself more fortified around the types of attacks that you see out there. And if you look at a lot of the attacks, if you look at a lot of what's happened in the past 5 years, even the most recent ones, we see major breaches happen with like OPM or Sony or whomever, right? All of those attacks are being claimed as being sophisticated attacks from, nation states and all of these other things. And if you actually look at how the attacks occurred, they're very simplistic in nature. They're easy attacks that haven't really, required a significant amount of sophistication. And if you're somebody that can code like 4 lines of bash, you're pretty much in the same caliber as the sophisticated attackers that are out there right now compromising these organizations. So, right now you kind of look at the industry, and if you're getting attacked by someone that's outside the United States, you now have a leverage point and an excuse for horrible security practices that you've had for the past 5 years. Instead of having, a good security program or investing in security, you can just say, well, we just got hacked by China, and now it's okay because you haven't invested anything in security now because you're, one of the few that actually detected it, 6 months to a year later after it occurred. So, what I'd like to talk about is what I see from my perspective going into companies, breaking into things, and also, on the defensive side, really kind of where we need to move to. And then I kind of just go through a lot of the different tools that I've written and kind of show you how you can leverage that to attack things and how you can stop those types of attacks. So for me, it's really trying to understand what the attacks look like today and all those other things. For us as assessors, our main focus has always traditionally been going after domain admin rights. That's kind of how we work, right? It's, hey, we're going to pop somebody, from the outside through a phishing attack. Then from there, we're going to try to escalate permissions. We're going to move laterally in the environment. And then from there, we're going to try to attack the server infrastructure and then get access to domain accounts. And once we got domain admin, we're good. We're going to dump all the hashes, and then we're going to write our reports, right? That's kind of how the assessments have traditionally gone in our industry and where we've kind of worked as far as pen testers. And there's varying levels of that. Sometimes, you have folks that are just running scanners, and then from there, you get a report on scanning, SSL v2s out of date or something like that. Or you actually have people that do the assessment and testing, and they just focus on the domain administrative level type testing that you see out there, which is what we see today as kind of the standard type of attacks. Now, for me, as looking at what the attackers are going after, it's a lot different. The attackers are motivated for looking for certain things that are important to them. For example, like organized crime or Eastern European areas, they go after money, right? So there's a lot of wire fraud schemes that are going on right now. Well, they'll actually spoof an email coming from like the CEO saying, hey, I need you to wire money to this specific address, and then they target people within the finance organization, and the finance organization is like, oh crap, I got to send a wire transfer because the CEO is asking me, and then they start to go through that process, and it may or may not get detected during that accounting process. We just had a customer that tried wiring $1 million out of the company, and was almost there. Like it was at the point to where like they were going to, and then all of a sudden, like right when they're about to do it, it required a second authorization. Like, hey, maybe I should check with somebody really quick. After they already authorized it, but they realized because it was over the limit, they had to sign something, right? So different motives based on the different types of attackers. And we as an industry in security, we have to focus our efforts on understanding those types of attacks and what's important to our company. If you're in a large organization, if you're in the Fortune 1000 chain, or you're even bleeding into the 100 million mark or above, you're going to be subject to these wire fraud attacks. These are very common attack vectors that are out there. In fact, I'm sure somebody in this audience here has experienced something just like that happen to them. It's just a very common event. But if you look at your company itself, there's something that makes your company unique. There's something that makes your company special, because if it wasn't, it wouldn't be in business. Whether it's making a widget or selling a service or doing something that requires something unique that you have a good brand in that industry, it's quality or whatnot. You have something unique that somebody wants to get. So if it's manufacturing, for example, the thing that you make isn't what attackers are going after. That widget that you make isn't what they can go after, because they can just take that widget, they can reverse engineer and figure out how it was built, and then they can build it, right? Because it's not hard to figure that out. But let's just say you're a 100-year-old company making widgets, and that 100 years of expertise of your build process, the chemicals that you use, the sourcing you use for people, the pricing for that is what they're after, right? If I know how much you're paying and how much you're selling it to a competitor for, and that whole build process in between, I can now create your exact same product, compete with you for half the cost in your own market, and start to take that away from you. So those are what's important to companies right now, and that's what they're going after. Being part of Binary Defense, so Trusted Sec is offensive company, right? And we do GRC and QSA work too and whatever, but that's like a consulting company, right? Binary Defense is on the defensive side, so the 24/7 like MSSP type model where we have incident response on top of that. We get to do a lot of investigations where you see attacks. And we're dealing with one recently, and this one was actually legitimately China. I hate saying it's China because everybody says it's China. But when you do analysis, one is that at least everything was like Chinese characters and like pointing to Chinese servers and like Chinese domain names and stuff like that. So I would assume it's China. It could be somebody else. Who knows? But in this specific case, they were going after very specific pieces that they needed access to in order to promote what they're currently researching and what they're currently trying to develop in. And they're very targeted in what they do. They target individuals that are part of that company. They target individuals that are researching those types of places. They go after specific people that have access to the data they need. And they also target the procurement systems, the sourcing models, how they go after the types of parts. They're very, very motivated in understanding exactly what they're doing. Now let me ask a question. I explained what our traditional pen testing model is today, right? Let's get domain admin. Is that anywhere in shape or form what they're doing right now? No. It has nothing to do with one another. Getting domain admin has nothing to do with what we're seeing as far as attacks today. And I mean that just not just from a nation-state perspective, but also from an organized crime going after money. Retail, their business is customer information, right? The sourcing of their products to get it to the stores and credit card data. That's retail. That's all they really care about. They don't care about build processes or chemical formulas or anything like that. Theirs is customers and making sure that money comes into the company. Whole different demographic than a company that manufactures something, or a whole different demographic of medicals. And medical's an interesting one because they're in so many different hot points for people. Like, for example, medical research is a huge area for nation states going after. For organized crime, getting access to PHI information or social security numbers for medical fraud or identity fraud. Those are huge different demographics. So you have multiple demographics hacking you for medical on the medical side. The medical industry is like the worst. Like they have no security. And then they're all of a sudden like, hey, and now I need to move all my information to ePHI because, the government's telling us to go to ePHI for everything and we have no security around any of these practices. And then all of a sudden I have massive conglomerate databases of all this information and now it's like readily available to hackers. Medical insurance, oh my God. They're using mainframes from, 1982 that, include, millions and millions and millions of people's social security numbers in an unencrypted database. But that's where we're at today. But we don't simulate any of that as part of our pen test. We might try to go after a database. We don't simulate being different adversaries, do we? We don't focus on understanding what the attackers are looking at, actually doing some sort of threat modeling around actually attacking an organization based off of what they expect. So there's a big gap right now where we're at as far as assessors to where the attackers are, because, what was interesting, I think, you look at the, and not to derail the talk too much, but if you look at where the industry started from, like where we came from, it was that curiosity piece of going after and thinking like an attacker, and that's kind of how the whole white hat community spawned, right? Thinking like an attacker and becoming an attacker. Then it became this massive conglomerate commercial, scene, which understandable because we need security, but we lost that whole focus of trying to understand the attacker and simulating the attacker. So now we're just researchers, we're pen testers, we're exploit dev folks that, release this research and release all this stuff, and we don't focus on what's actually happening out there. And don't get me wrong, I mean, the research stuff is phenomenal, it's needed, it's absolutely needed, but I also know that all the research that we're putting into the industry, they're also doing the exact same amount of research, and they're using our stuff to promote what they're doing. I mean, Mimikatz, anybody familiar with Mimikatz? You know how many times I've seen that in a real live attack before? Almost all the time. Mimikatz is one of the most widely used tools, in an attack environment for mostly, nation-state type stuff. I mean, it's modified and encrypted, so the PE files are encrypted, so you don't get detected. But that's one of the most, but it's a pen tester tool that we use on a regular basis. So these types of things that we see out there, we need to simulate those types of environments to go after these types of organizations. It's really interesting to see. So for me, we need to evolve more towards what we call objective pen testing. Understanding that it's more than just DA, and it's more about identifying what's important to the company and focusing our efforts on building defenses around what's important. Because you're not going to be able to do everything. I mean, our days of having a castle with archers on top and a heavily fortified moat where, we're protecting everything and there's no BYOD and there's no cloud services and all that stuff is gone, right? There's no perimeter anymore. It was gone when we thought we had a castle anyway. But, the perimeter is gone. And so we have to adjust our security practices to that and understand that we can't protect everything. I always use this example to kind of put it into a rational thought to people in the audience. Is anybody here working in a corporate environment? Okay, a lot of you, most of you. Does anybody here have enough people dedicated to security in your environment to secure the organization? Everybody laughs, right? It's a laugh. It's a laughable thing because there's no way. Like, literally, if you're a 10,000 person company, in order for us to secure a 10,000 person company, we need 10,000 security professionals. And you have a 10,000, I'm talking like the sales guys right here, security guys sitting right here like, nope, don't click that, nope, no, no, that's okay, that's okay, you're okay. That would secure an organization, we'd be good. Unfortunately, business doesn't work that way, does it? Now, do we have enough funding for security? No, right? But then we get a budget for $2 million, but we don't have enough people to support that budget for $2 million, so we buy a tool and it makes it even more complex, and then it's like in this insane cyclical crazy effect of like, hey, new technology versus not having people, and then it's just like a whole hodgepodge of mess. So then we try to pawn it off to IT, and then IT hates us. It's like this whole massive, crazy, cyclical effect that we have here right now. But anyways, back to this. When we look at attackers, we have to simulate and go after what attackers are going after, and that's understanding what our business is. And that's why I think you see a lot of companies moving towards internal pen testers. Because internal pen testers are more so looking at applications that are being developed, things like that, but they're still not focusing on what's important. Like, if you look at high-value assets within a company, people are like, well, I don't have enough people to staff, protecting everything. That's right, you don't. So focus on an area that's important to you as a company that makes and generates revenue for you and start protecting that. Like, hey, we have a mainframe of like 40 million social security numbers. I should probably protect that and focus all my efforts. Even though it's going to take me 6 months to move the business in this direction, I probably should start moving down that direction to get that going so that I can at least have to fix that versus everything else. Like, if I get a breach, it sucks. If I get a breach of 40 million social security numbers, that really sucks, right? Or, hey, all of our R&D stuff, yeah, I mean, it's important. If that gets breached, yeah, that sucks, right? So I should probably protect that, right? I should probably protect things that make money for my company so that I still have a job. And if we get breached, hey, it's going to happen. But at least they didn't get that 40 million social security numbers or that credit card data, right? It's a manageable way to think about something that's a very overwhelming task. So for me, it requires thinking outside the box, right? It requires to understand an organization. It requires going through different attack simulations to really find the best route to that data that you need access to. And I'm actually going to go through a demonstration of a recent pen test, a red team effort that we did, where we do that. And what's kind of cool is we do what's called, so there's you have your traditional pen testing, you have your traditional red teaming. We do something called attack simulation, which is more so focusing on understanding, where a company's at from the detective control. So like, yeah, we can try simulating, exfiltrating terabytes of data out or credit card data out and see where you can actually detect that from different points in your environment. But most importantly, we first understand the business itself, and we go after that data for the business. A very specific attack versus an entire attack against an organization that you traditionally get on a pen test. And that's, by the way, if you're a pen tester in an organization that isn't, that's doing this consulting, you have to move to this, or at least you should move to this type of model. Granted, I mean, everybody needs a pen test done for PCI or whatnot, I guess, whatever. You can do those. But until we get to more of a model of precise attacks going after data that's relevant to a company, we're not going to mature as an industry. So here's a recent heist that we did. This is fun because it was a red team exercise, attack simulation, where we could do anything we wanted to. And so first, the main objectives in understanding the company and working with them was to get after their R&D, because they're a manufacturing company. The next product line is something that was heavily sought by competitors, something that would promote a very strong growth, at least that's what they projected. And it was very interesting because they did business in a lot of different countries like China, Russia, a few other ones that would want access to that type of data as well, because they have direct competing companies inside of the governments. So something that's very important to them. And they've taken very good strides on protecting this information. I didn't know this going into it, by the way, so more of a black box. So they did do a lot of research on protecting R&D and doing things like network segmentation and appropriate practices and keeping people away from it and access control. Like, imagine that. Access control, network segmentation makes it very difficult to get access to the data. It's amazing, like that concept from like 1992, or I think it was like a book in like 1965 or something like that. But, it actually works. Well, it did for a while, then we got around it. But, so first thing we did phishing, right? And we fished within the R&D group. And what was nice about that is when we started going after them, we were trying to look at which way we were going to fish them. And for me, understanding who I'm attacking is important. Understanding mindsets. Like, I tried not to go after IT folks because usually they're pretty tech savvy. Like, hey, hey, your new benefits website's up. I didn't remember a benefits website. I mean, I'm in IT. I run this whole thing. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's not good. And then you block, and oh, crud, that sucks. Okay. And then your whole fish and everything that you were doing was totally just jacked, right? So this, what we started doing is we started looking at the best way to compromise the R&D folks. And so we started going through the websites, and we actually found a website that was on the outside that had a file upload vulnerability in it. So if you're familiar with file uploads, if it doesn't properly sanitize, you can upload malicious content and from there execute, okay? What's great about that is it gets you access to the web server to compromise in some cases, but you only have limited permissions in that environment to actually go and attack. So what we first try to do once we compromise the site is we tried going in and going after the specific website itself and looking at possible SQL authentication in the web.config files and whatnot. Didn't find anything. Wasn't able to use that to leverage or move laterally in the environment. So we rewrote a portion of the web page. We added another web page to the website that gave us the look and feel of it as part of a corporate website. So let's just say company X, right? So you went to companyx.com / something, and we made this a survey question to the R&D folks based off of did they think that they're being compensated enough? It's always a good one because you attach the human emotion. So do you feel happy with everything that's going on there? So we did this. And we sent the survey site out to it, and we sent it to the R&D group specifically within 4 people, and we ended up phishing them and got access to username and password because we had a username and password field to log into actually submit the survey itself because it's part of a corporate survey site. So we did that, compromised them, and then ended up getting usernames and passwords. Now, what's great with usernames and passwords, and especially when you're targeting R&D, I didn't want to actually do any type of remote code execution at this point in time because I wanted to get credentials first. And I figured, hey, I could probably go in and do a VPN or whatnot. And so once we compromised, and I'll go back actually one. Once we compromised these individuals and we got the usernames and passwords, I tried to go to the VPN, two-factor authentication. It's great, right? Works great. Problem is that they had the VPN over two-factor authentication, but they didn't have their OWA under two-factor authentication, which is so much of a common thing. I always see this. I don't know why we secure VPNs, but we don't do OWA. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. But anyways, so no two-factor on OWA. So I was able to log into their accounts and see emails going back and forth and things like that, right? Now what's great about that, and my favorite part of it, is that if you compromise somebody via OWA, you already have an established trust path to almost anybody in the company because you have a person inside of the company that you can use to send, and what's great is if you're going through emails and you already see some, a communication going on between a few folks, you can just respond to one of those and hey dude, open this up. And they open it up and they're hey, they just got compromised, right? So it's a great way to actually attack people, especially if you're going after people through OWA, is through, an already established trust avenue. So I spent 2 or 3 hours just going through emails, and I found one that was we're waiting on a sales update through one of the people, and like salespeople are like the best, right? Like when you get a sales email, you're like, oh my god, I can get this guy to do anything I want to because he's sales. And they have no idea, right? I mean, you could be like, hey, this is a virus, do not open it. And he's like, oh, I need to open this email, cool. You know, like they do anything, right? And what's great is like if you target sales folks too, like a lot of times what we'll do for our phishing is we'll look at like the demographics of that company. If they're like a B2B type company, like business to business, I'll actually create a fake company that's just in their sweet spot for an organization, and I'll create the company and everything. I'll call up the salespeople. I'm like, hey, I'm this company. I'm interested in buying your products, you know, and I have like $5 million you need to spend by next week. Can you guys help me out? Oh, yeah, sure. Hey, can you just go to hey, by the way, what antivirus do you guys use? And, oh, yeah, we use Symantec. Oh, what version is it? And he's like, I don't know. Can you double click on it? Like, that's weird, but I want the $5 million, so I'm just going to, like, oh, yeah, hey, it's Symantec 12, you know, step 12, that's great. You know, oh, hey, yeah, you know, can you just go to this website? Does it work? Yeah, it works. You can just click run. Yeah, you guys are like, yeah, it works good. Okay, cool, thanks, man. You know, it's all set, right? Salespeople are great. But anyways, this one specifically, there was a chain between one of the R&D folks for updating marketing material for sales. And so I targeted that individual, and I responded back, and I said, hey, here's the latest, here's the statistics from the Excel document that I want to show you. Does this make sense to you? And what happens inside of OWA, if you're not familiar, is you can create what are called rules. And rules allow you to take certain things that might have a certain subject line or things like that and move it to a different folder, right? And so what I do is I made sure that there was a rule in place that if the salesperson ever sent anything back, it would automatically go to deleted items so that it couldn't trigger off anybody, like especially the person that I had hacked, that something was amiss there and he had never sent an Excel document. So I did that first. Then I sent the email out via Excel. And this is a new attack vector that was recently introduced into a tool. I'm going to show it to you right now. It's my favorite. And originally, this is, so to give a little bit of history of this, this is actually a brand new version that I haven't ever showed before, ever in the history of showing. So I'll show you this today. It's version 2, which will be coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I just finished it literally as Ben was talking. I was listening to both, by the way. I can do 2 things at once, which is, my wife doesn't think I can, but I was listening to Ben. PowerShell. I heard everything. Something PowerShell. Right. But Unicorn is a tool that I wrote probably about 2 years ago, and it was based off of research from Matthew Graber, who's just one of the best PowerShell ninjas I've ever encountered. The guy, like he's one of those guys that's just like crazy HD more smart, and you talk to him like, man, I thought I knew a lot, and then I just feel like I'm like 12 years old. Matthew's a phenomenal, just smart, brilliant dude. And Matthew did some research, and I think it's actually incorporated into his PowerSploit stuff. I think he moved off of that and redid it a little bit. But he figured out a way through PowerShell to do direct memory injection of shellcode. So the way he does that is first by enumerating the kernel 32 DLL base memory address, and then using virtual alloc to allocate memory through PowerShell into the PowerShell process, and then injecting your shellcode and then executing that shellcode directly into memory. So it was great research. And so what I did is I built a tool around that research, and I added quite a bit, and I redid a large percentage of it just for the fact that in Matthew's example, you needed 2 types of shellcode. You needed 64-bit shellcode and you needed 32-bit shellcode. And the reason for that is because if you're injecting into a 32-bit process and you inject 32-bit shellcode in there, obviously the application is going to crash and it's going to blow up, right? So in an attack vector, in an attack scenario, you don't want to have to always try to spray PowerShell 64-bit and PowerShell 32-bit based on the environments that you're going after. So what I did is I figured out a way to identify what platform we're running under through PowerShell. So if we're running a 32-bit or 64-bit platform, and then what will happen is if it detects it's a 32-bit system, it'll actually downgrade that process to a 32-bit process and then inject native 32-bit shellcode into a 64-bit operating system. So you can basically use native 32-bit shellcode on the same type of operating system. So that was the first iteration of Unicorn. I released that like 2 years ago. Most recently, I added 2 new attack vectors. And actually, one of them was a commit to add Excel injection for PowerShell exploitation. So what happens is like when you open up an Excel document with macros, right? Most macros have like a VB script or an exe that's inside of that, right? That goes and it downloads a specific thing or whatever, and then it executes. This, in turn, actually rewrites that macro to do straight up PowerShell injection and compromise the system. So it never touches disk. To Ben's point on the application whitelisting piece, see, I was paying attention. Most of the time, like if you're using something like bit9, PowerShell.exe is going to be an already whitelisted application. So if you open up the Excel document, it injects PowerShell directly into memory, doesn't write anything to disk, and then it compromises it with an interpreter payload or whatever you want to specify for assembly. So, with this case, you can actually just do it. And I'll show you a quick example of it. And any tool that I write, any hacker tool has to have ASCII art. It's a prerequisite. I'm going back to like the 1980s, BBS days of ASCII art. It's an art itself. But anyways, what you can see here, there's a few different examples. And one of the new attack vectors that I haven't talked about yet, Justin LZ actually put me onto this one, which is phenomenal. So if you remember, I'll get to that in a second. I won't go into the HDA stuff yet. I'll show you that in a second. But here what you can do is you say specify unicorn.py, what payload you want to, the IP address of your handler for Metasploit, the ports, and then any optional things like HDR macros. And all you do is, let's just say I want to do PowerShell injection here, okay? And I just write Python unicorn.py, Windows, interpreter, reverse, HTTPS. And if you're familiar with Metasploit payloads, the reverse HTTPS is probably one of the most reliable exploitation methods because everybody allows SSL out of their network. And the HTTPS payload is proxy aware. So if you're using proxy settings, it'll actually hijack your proxy settings through WinINet, I think it's WinINet, right? In order to communicate over HTTPS in order to go back and forth. So it actually works very well in an exploitation scenario. Now, one thing I just added, literally as I was flying back from Hawaii yesterday, they did a lot of rework on the Metasploit HTTPS first stage and second stage. A lot of new changes. A lot of guys working on the configuration of the module. It grew significantly in size, like massively in size. So the reverse HTTPS first stage, and if you're not familiar with stages, the first stage is supposed to be like the small compact code that all it does is do a request out, pulls back what's called the second stage. The second stage is then pushed down, which is the big conglomerate data interpreter, right? Gets sent to that second stage and then shot into memory. The first stage grew significantly. Now, why that's a problem is when you're doing PowerShell and you're trying to get it all in one command line that you can fit, you have certain restriction sizes that you have for PowerShell because you don't want to drop files onto the operating system. I don't want to drop a file and that file gets snagged by, something like signature-based or something. That would be ridiculous. So, you have to figure out how to confine things and make space in a small restricted space you have. But, so I started going through and I actually shrunk down the PowerShell exploitation code by about 47 bytes, which is a big deal. But it still wasn't large enough for the interpreter reverse HTTPS. So what I was able to do is there's actually some advanced configuration options that I was able to subtract off of it through the when it's actually packaging the reverse HTTPS. I was able to get the size down just enough and plenty enough. And actually, I think I have like an extra 127 bytes now, which is great, to actually get it all within one specific command line. So now the reverse HTTPS is supported in the version that I released yesterday, 1.3. Yesterday in Unicorn. So you can do reverse HTTP, reverse HTTPS, reverse TCP is really small, it's just a traditional socket, but it works really quick and easy to do. So we'll do HTTPS, and then I'm just going to do port 443. I did something wrong. I didn't do my IP address. So it needs your IP address of your attacker box, so we're doing a reverse. So mine's 170.131. And run it, it's going to generate the shellcode for us, and it's going to export two files. The first one's going to be PowerShell_attacks.txt. The second one's going to be unicorn.rc. The RC file is just a resource file to create your Metasploit listener for you, so you don't have to deal with, use multi-handler, set payload, Windows interpreter, reverse HTTP, set lhost, all that stuff, right? You don't have to worry about all that. Now, one thing to note too, if you're into getting around a lot of things like Palo Altos and stuff like that, most companies don't allow direct executables from being downloaded, correct? You can't download a .exe extension. Well, some of the content filtering and next-gen firewalls have gone a little bit further, and they actually take a look at the file that's being downloaded to make sure that it doesn't have like an MZ header or a PE file header when it's being downloaded, right? So as you make a connection out, the browser, if it's trying to download an exe, even though it doesn't have an exe extension, most of the new web content filters and the Palo Altos and next-gens will protect against that because you don't want it to actually download that. Now, what happens within the reverse HTTPS, and I don't know if this has changed since the newest revision, but something actually occurs. A web request over SSL is made from the victim machine that's compromised out to the attacker machine that houses the second stage. That second stage was actually an MZ or an exe file that was a PE file, so most content filters will actually block that HTTPS request if they're actually inspecting what file is being downloaded. You can actually get around that, and if you're familiar with encoding, there's an encoder that came out a long time ago, it was like 2005, 2006, called Shikata Gaine, which is You'll Never Stop Us. And Shikata was used for the longest time of getting around antivirus because it allowed obfuscation of a binary and it was never the same signature each time. The problem is that there was specific parts of that executable that were predictable, and it allowed antivirus to write signatures off of that, and Shikata hasn't been a viable method for antivirus bypass for a very long time. However, if you can apply Shikata to your executable over the wire, it's just random garbage data that you can't write signatures for. So what you can actually do inside of Metasploit is there's now an advanced configuration flag called set enable stage encoding to true. And if you enable that, it actually morphs that PE file into a gobbledygook of data, and it looks like legitimate traffic going over the wire. So it gets around most of your content filter, gets around your Palo Altos and everything else out there. So all you have to do, and I should just add this by default. I'll just do it now. I mean, I'll add it in there. See where it says set exit session false? If you just do something like set enable stage encoding to true, that will enable that second stage once it passes it to be a polymorphic / encoded binary that'll be out there. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll just run it. So I run this code right here, right? So I'm running the RC file, which is the Metasploit resource file that just creates a handler for us to listen to, because when I create my payload has to call out to my handler a port and actually communicate, so I can have bidirectional communication here. So it's going to launch this, and it's running. Now what we need to do next is I need to get to my directory again. And it also exports a PowerShell underscore attack.txt file. And inside of this file is just a command line of what I'm going to run. And this is my first stage encoded command. And this gets around what's called execution restriction policies, because so you can basically take a PowerShell program, compact it into one line, cast it Unicode, and then base64 encode it. And then you pass it what's called an encoded command parameter, and this allows you to get around what's called execution restriction policies. So even if you're in restricted, all signed, or any of the other execution restriction policies, it doesn't matter in this specific case because it allows you to get around it. And so we're going to make that window hidden, so when I run it, it doesn't pop up or anything, right? Encoded. I'm passing the encoded command. I just abbreviated it -encoded, and then that's my Unicode / base64 encoded program that I'm going to be running that has all my Metasploit shell code and everything else in there. Okay. So what I need to do on a Windows machine, let's just say I compromise it in some way, shape, or form. I get access to this box and I pop it, and I either I can do it through SQL injection, or I can do it through PSexec commands, which is an auxiliary Metasploit module, or I get it through a phishing of a site where someone clicks on something. All I need to be able to do is paste that command into my victim machine or have it automatically run, and then I should have access to the computer. So if I paste it, notice it's just a command, right? This is just a PowerShell command right here. So PowerShell -Windows hidden encoded, and then my encoded command. As soon as I hit enter, it goes away, right? And you wouldn't see this on the victim machine if I actually compromise it. And then over here, we get our shell, and it's encoded. Circumvents, application whitelisting, antivirus, all that good stuff. It gets around your Palo Altos, your next-gen firewalls, your web content filtering, all over HTTPS, all proxy aware. Yeesh, that's a bad one, right? So that's a nasty one. Now, one of the new ones that I just added is doing the same thing, running that unicorn command, that exact same one I did before. Can you guys see that okay? Okay. Instead of doing that, just type macro at the end. You hit enter. And this will generate all the macro code for you that you just embed into your Excel document. And what's kind of cool about it is it'll also, like when they go to open up the file will say, this file is corrupted, please close and try again. It looks like a Microsoft error update. So, they'll send it back, when you're doing something like via email, they'll send you an email back and say, hey, the Excel didn't work, can you send me a new one? And if you set it through the OWA, set the rules right, it just goes to the deleted inbox and you never see it, right? So, they're like, oh, it must have been a bad, Excel document or something. So it doesn't trigger a lot of alarms. So if I just edit this real quick, here's all the code for the macro. And as soon as they open that up in the document and they hit enable macros, it compromises their machine through PowerShell injection the same way. And what's great about this method is a lot of cases it'll get around most like SMTP filtering because it's not a traditional downloader and it's not a traditional executable that's embedded into a VB script or into an Excel document. I haven't seen this get snagged at all by any of the major content filtering type things. Email. Now the latest one, which I'm really excited about, and I have to give Justin Eldsey a shout out for this, because it's really slick. If you know the history around SET, the social engineering toolkit, one of the big flagships that SET used was the Java applet attack, right? And the Java applet attack it works extremely well still today because everybody has to have Java installed, right? But in a lot of cases, Java has moved a lot differently to a different model where, like 5 years ago, you could do what's called a non-code signed Java applet or self-signed applet. And what would happen is when it pop up, you'd see like the publisher, and you can make the publisher anything you want to. So I could be like, hey, I'm Google. And it could be like, hey, what's the name of the applet? This is a Google certified applet. And that you could do that from a non-code signing perspective. And it would say that this thing isn't code signed, but it would say it was from Google. So what would people do? They'd be like, yeah, right? It's good, right? It's all set. Right? That's cool. And they try to click a whole bunch of times, right? Because it's like, fast. But what happened is Oracle got smart and they started making more adjustments. And I went on a tirade for like 3 years just ripping Oracle, and I got like letters from them. Like they were like, can you just please stop making fun of us or whatever? I'm like, nope, I'm going to keep going. And so they actually fixed it, which was great. And so what they did is that if you self-sign something now, they actually have to degrade their security settings and go into Java to actually allow that application, that site to work, which stops a lot of the low-profile attacks through Java. However, to get around that, if you just have a code signing cert, which by the way is extremely easy to get, it's like $200. Go and buy a code signing cert, you can be anybody you want to again. So you can just get a code signing cert and then sign it, and then everybody's all happy again anyway. So for $200, but not every hacker has $200, I guess, right? Like China doesn't have $200, like Russia doesn't have $200. The guys that are in organized crime that are getting $1 million wire transfers, I'm sure don't have $200 either to spend on a code signing cert. So I'm sure it's fine, right? But anyways, so on the code signing front, if you have a code signing cert, Java exploitation is still very, very, very effective. However, there's a new method that Justin put me onto, which is called HTA files. And HTA files are something that are built into Microsoft's platform for it's like high. Anybody know what HTA stands for? I think it's like high technology asset or something. I don't remember what it stands for. He told me a while ago. I don't remember. But anyways, HTAs are something that you can build that are built into the web browser. And it's interesting is they actually emulate very much the same behavior that Java did 5 years ago. It's phenomenal. Like you can do anything you want to with them, and it looks like it's signed by Microsoft. It's great. So watch this. So I'm going to run this tool real quick, okay? So I just gave it the HTA extension. This is not public yet. I've not released this. I literally just finished it back there in 4 rows. So it was long story. I was on the plane. I was trying to finish it, and then they made me close my lid and everything, and I didn't finish it. So I opened back up like, oh, hey, I still need to finish this. So I finished it up there. Anyways, so what this does is it creates a new directory for you called HTA attack. And then in that directory are 3 files. One is that unicorn.rc file that creates that listener, right? The index.html says, hey, I need to call launcher.hta because I need to run an HTA file. And then the launcher.hta is the malicious HTA file. Now, I'll add obfuscation and stuff like that in there beforehand. And actually, I do already add obfuscation into the PowerShell injection piece. It morphs and changes every time. But I'll change the name and everything so it's not something you can statically look for because I hate when people write signatures for my stuff. So I always Alien Vault wrote a signature for a set. And within 13 minutes of them releasing the blog post, I had a new version that released that completely changed dynamically how everything's generated, period. There's no static portions in set whatsoever. So, so I try to get around anything. Anyways, long story. So you go to HTA attack. I do an ls here. And hopefully this worked because literally I just wrote it a couple minutes ago. You have index.html, launcher.hta, and unicorn.rc. I'm just going to go ahead and copy. I'm going to remove anything that's in there first. And you do rm-rf. You always want to make sure you're in the right directory first. Okay, got that. Whew. All right, I'm just going to move index.html to var www, and I'm going to move launcher.hta to var www. Okay? And let me make sure I don't have anything else listening here. No, I don't. And so I just move those 2 files that Unicorn just created, and I'm going to go ahead and run Metasploit again. Metasploit console-r. Remember that unicorn.rc file, right? That creates our listener. So now we have these 2 files in this directory, and then we have our listener that's listening on 443. Now, as a victim, if I send a phishing attack saying, "Hey, go to this website" or whatever, or an example of the email through OWA, if I go over to here and I click on this link, .170.131, you get this little message here like, "Do you want to open this?" Okay, you hit open. Here's what it says. It's a Microsoft HTML application host. Publisher's Microsoft Windows. It's Microsoft, man. They're the most trustworthy company. It's been verified. Everything's great, right? That's legit. We're good, right? So I'm gonna hit allow because it's Microsoft. Okay. As soon as I hit allow, I get a shell. E for shells. Very reliable exploitation method. I mean, really awesome way of getting access to computers that you don't need Java. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Justin. And no, it works on Chrome, works on Firefox. It'll work on anything that allows HTA extensions, which are any native browser. It'll ask you to open it. Yep. No, both. No, opens in Chrome, opens up in Chrome will say, this is an abnormal extension. Do you want to open it? And as soon as you open it, it'll still say Microsoft, all that other stuff. So, if you're using Chrome or something like that, but it's still great. I mean, you build that into your pretext, which is, hey, when you go to this website, it's going to ask you to open it. It's a Microsoft, verification check. You need to make sure you run it. Boom, you're all set, right? So you literally build in a couple, one-liner in there, and you keep things simple when you're dealing with, especially with sales folks. Like, you got to real simple. But make sure you do that. Like I used to actually do things like when the self-signed applet change came in, I'd actually tell them like go to here, degrade your security settings, and here's screenshots of how to do it. And I still get people that would get shells on that. So like you can literally do anything you want to, but the less steps you have to do, the better. The HTA one's one of my favorites if you don't have Java as an exploitation method. One thing I will say is that this method I'm baking into the next version of the social engineer toolkit, so that in the event that the Java applet attack fails, it'll fall back to the HTA method as a reliable exploitation method. So you'll have both available to you built into set as an exploitation framework for that as well. So yes, yep. Regardless of where you are, it's going to open up that extension. Yep. Should be, yeah. Now, is MSHTA used for anything? I don't know. Yeah. Stop writing stuff in my stuff. Ben's not allowed in my talks. So get him out of here because he's going to write. So anyways, really easy exploitation method to go through. And the files themselves are very simple to create. So that'll be the next version. I forgot with HTTPS, it's actually got to send a kill signal, so it's going to take a second to shut down. Anyways, yeah, that's it. So I ended up sending initially the Excel document to fish these people back to the whole attack vector, right? So send it to them. And what was interesting is they had virtualization sandboxing technology. Now, if you're not familiar with virtualization or sandboxing technology, there's a whole bunch out there. The next-gen firewalls have it. A certain company that always attributes things to sophisticated attacks has one as well. There's a few different organizations that have this type of technology. Now, if you're not familiar with how it works, what happens is that whether it's web content or email content coming into your environment, so let's just say an email comes in that has an extension, an Excel document, right? What it does is it spins up a virtual machine really fast. And it takes that Excel document and it opens it up to see if there's anything crazy or weird happening, behavior, right? So if there's registry hooks or writing executables or VB scripts or communications outbound, things that would be malicious in nature, right? It'll sandbox that and it'll actually execute that and it'll try to stop it from actually coming through. So in this case, we ran into the virtualization technology. I won't say which one. So I had to bypass it, right? And bypassing a sandbox, it takes a lot of work, right? Because you got to figure out a virtual machine escape. It takes months and months and months of research and exploit dev. So we ended up going through and took months of research to develop this, and I'm actually releasing it today. Just kidding, it's really not hard to get around it at all. It didn't take anything. It didn't take months. It took like 3 lines of code. So to get around virtualization technology, all you have to do, so what happens is that when it brings it into that virtual machine, let's just say it runs, right? If it doesn't do anything, is it malicious? No, right? If it doesn't do anything, it's not malicious. So if you can profile what those virtual machine sandboxing hardware requirements are, most of them are like 1 CPU core and like 512 megs of RAM. Do any of your users have 1 CPU or 512 megs of RAM? No. So if you just say, hey, if I'm running in less than 2 CPU cores, then don't do anything, am I malicious? No. So you just build that into your attack that you do, and all of my attacks have that built into it, by the way, now. And by the way, this is the same bypass method that Dyer is using right now to get into a lot of companies. Dyer actually incorporates this exact method, which is why I published this. We've been using this for a few years, and we've all let them know for years that this is an issue. We've been using this for a few years, but the reason why we make it public now is because it's actively being used in the wild right now for things. So in this case, if you just say your CPU is less than 2, don't do anything. It's not going to run my code. It's not going to run my malicious code. But as soon as I'm in an environment that isn't 1 CPU, it's going to go and run my code, and it's malicious. So it gets around a lot of those sandboxing technologies that are out there, which is really cool. So we got around that. And so we had, when we actually did our initial phishing attack, we ended up getting about 7 different people. it took some time to kind of go through and find additional paths and everything. But we did send that one to that initial sales and marketing person, which gave us access to that person's box. So we compromised his machine. Now we're on this box, right? Now we're on this box, and we have to do post-exploitation scenarios to get access to this R&D information, because the R&D stuff is so important to us, right? That's our mission, our goal to go after. We have to get to R&D. So we get to the R&D side, and we start looking for people in R&D, and I can't find anything on these projects. Like, they even gave us project names and things. I can't find them anywhere. Not in file shares, not on internet pages, not in their emails. I'm like, what in the heck? Where is this stuff at? We spent a long time looking for this R&D stuff. So I was upset. I was really mad because we couldn't find anything. So, being a red team, I'm like, okay, so they probably have good network segmentation around their R&D stuff. And I saw some documentation, because I hacked the IT folks, around that network segment that they use and how restrictive it was and everything. And I wasn't going to be able to get to it from where I was at. So I needed to figure out a different way to get access to that R&D room. And so I'm like, okay, well, physical is going to be cool. So I'll go and do a physical. So I hacked their badging system. And it was great because, like, on the internet page, like, physical security, I don't understand. Like, they're usually like 15 years behind, like anything that's modern technology. Like, they're still using like BlackBerries and stuff like that. It's like really weird. But in the physical security side, I went to the internet page. I'm making fun of me, it's wearing BlackBerry. But you go to the internet site, and it gives you procedures on how to create a new badge for a new employee. So I'm like, okay, this is awesome. So I created myself a new badge because I'm a new employee now. And I, uploaded my picture and everything. I created a new badge. It gets processed. And then, it tells you what to do. Grab the badge and put up to the front desk person, in order to do it. So I sent an email, from the R&D thing saying, hey, the badge that got committed is not at the front desk. Can you put it at the front desk for this new employee? And they're like, oh yeah, it's at the printing press here. We'll move it over there. So, got a new badge added, and I added all my access that I needed to the R&D facility to get access to this environment. So I created a new badge and had everything, that I needed to get over there. And so I dressed up in like, some professional attire, live footage. No, I dressed up, in decent attire. So I figured, oh, hey, I'm going to come in kind of like in a suit and tie, which is the wrong idea, by the way. But instead, I want to come in like a suit and tie type thing because I wanted to look important, so no one would question me. Because a lot of times if you have a level of dress or caliber, people don't want to talk, question you unless they're higher up, I guess. So I went to the front desk and I grabbed the badge because I'm like, hey, I'm Dave. Here's my ID. Can I get my badge? Yeah, the badge is right here. Great, here you go. Cool. Beep, walk in, right? And so I'm walking around and I'm trying to find access to the R&D site. And so I finally get access to this room, and I get into the R&D room, and it's a swipe and a pin. So I hit the pin number or whatever, and I walk in. Again, I'm wearing a suit. I walk in R&D, and like all of these people are like in jeans and t-shirts. I definitely did not fit in at all, right? Like I'm in the worst possible case because like it's one of those moments, like where you walk into a room and like there's like a million people having a huge meeting, and they all look at you like you're in the wrong place. So I did that, right? And I had to decide whether I'm going to go in or go out, right? So I'm like, I'll just go in, and I shut the door. And I kind of like walked to the side, so I didn't want to bother anybody. And I'm not paying attention. And literally, I'm walking around the side, and I trip over a big metal garbage trash can. And there's like water and spraying everywhere. There's like food everywhere. Like I'm in my suit. I got spaghetti on me. And so people are like picking me up, like, oh my God, are you okay? Are you all right? Like, who are you? What are you doing? I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. And I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I was, coming over here to drop this off. And they're like, okay, cool. If you need anything, just let us know. Sorry about that. We didn't, So, I end up, got spaghetti on my nice suit and everything. So anyways, get inside. And so people are picking me up. I skipped that war gobble. I think I had the war gobble thing in there. And I end up planting a device that we call our TAP devices, which have an LTE module on it. So basically, it's a network device that has all of our tools that establishes a reverse VPN to our environment through an LTE network. So we plug it into the one side, and then you have an LTE network on the other. They're just NUCs, and I've been talking about it. I'll be releasing the source for it soon. It's called a TAP device. We call it the Trusted Sec Attack Platform. But it's the tool, the code itself is really slick. It heals itself in case there's issues. Like for example, like if it establishes a break in the communication, it repairs itself and tries to fix it. It fixes issues in the OS. It tries multiple methods of exfiltration out if you don't have an LTE infrastructure. And then we also wrote, it's kind of neat. It's Jeff Walton on our team. It's a reverse SSH connection. And we actually wrote a direct connect SSH VPN. So like it's a full legit tap, interface through VPN tunnel through an SSH interface, which is really cool. So we'll be open sourcing that, or I'll be open sourcing it whenever I feel like writing the blog post for it, which takes forever. So, but it's up. I'll be putting out soon. So we ended up getting in, got access to R&D stuff, showed how we were able to do it. And what that does is twofold, right? One is, someone can go to the link to get the R&D stuff through physical methods, but it helps build better defenses against what they're doing. For example, the R&D folks that I was able to at least, harvest and compromise. OWE on the outside is obviously a major issue. how I was able to pivot and move laterally in the environments, and the detection capabilities around that are weak. So there's multiple ways to look at getting it and strengthening it for companies that have that type of capability to enhance their security program. So it was a good thing. Now, what's fun is when you do these types of engagements, you get to release and build new tools that are fun, right? So here's just a few tools that I've written over the past few years or whatnot, or new ones that I've released that are effective in doing a lot of these types of testing. About a year ago, I released Interpret over SSH. If you're not familiar with that, what happens is Metasploit payloads, like the first and second stage, if you're using like a reverse TCP or whatnot, those connections might be able to be snagged over like Snort or IDSs or things like that. What you can do, and what I figured out a way to do is when you compromise a system, you take that payload and you inject that payload into memory, like any traditional payload, right? So you're writing in memory, you're doing all your stuff in memory, but it does what's called a bind. If you're not familiar with binds and reverses, a bind makes a port on a local system, right? So it creates a new port, and I'd have to connect directly to that machine to access that port. Whereas a reverse, you compromise a victim machine and it shoots out the network to the victim. So what I do is I do a bind, which takes a port and it creates a new port. But if I'm on the outside internet, I can't directly connect to that because of NAT, right? And your firewalls and everything else aren't going to allow 4444 or whatever it is to the machine. So what I do is I take that port and then I wrap that around SSH and I do a reverse SSH tunnel outside of the network. So now I have a connection to my own local host, but it's really through a VPN or a SSH tunnel to the victim machine, and then I can use Interpreter over SSH. So it allows you to use SSH. If you allow SSH outbound, it's encrypted communications. It can't be eavesdropped upon. It looks like legitimate SSH traffic. And there's some great modules of Python. There's one called Paramiko, which is one of my favorite modules for reverse SSH tunnels. Phenomenal resource to use when you're doing those types of exploitation techniques. Mitigation around this: don't allow reverse SSH out of your network or SSH out of your network. What we generally recommend is that if you're going to allow SSH, have defined places that you allow SSH to. So more of a whitelist approach to SSH access. There shouldn't be a reason why you ever have those. And there's actually some great things you can do within like Cisco's, for example, or your next gen firewalls. They do a little bit of protocol analysis. So if you allow 18443 out, well, you can make sure that that's HTTP traffic. If it's not HTTP traffic, then drop it. If I'm trying to do an SSH over 443, it should be legitimately defined as SSH traffic, and you shouldn't allow that outbound. There's also things like for FTP. There's like inspect FTP RFC strict within Cisco, which allows it to actually map the RFC protocol to FTP. So if it's a non-FTP protocol, it'll go and block that. And those are easy to get around. I recommend whitelisting FTP addresses as well too. The Pentesters framework. This is a new one that I just released a couple weeks ago. And what this is as a pen tester, the biggest thing that I run into is making sure that my tools are always 100% out of date or up to date, not out of date. I'm using framework 1 that was written in Perl that they only have MSO3 plug and play exploit into, right? The Pentesters framework is a way for, and it's a modular way to keep all of your tools up to date. And what I did is I actually created a programming language behind it that even if you don't know how to program a line of code, you can easily make a module in like 2 minutes for your own tools or new tools that aren't in there that you use. And it's been really cool because the community has really taken step and added a whole bunch of modules. I think I've had like 40 different people contribute to different modules for the Pentesters framework. So the tool's continuously evolving to add more and more tools. And what it does is it'll go onto the site home of that tool, whether it's a GitHub, SVN, or just a straight file download, and it'll go in and pull that latest tool and latest code, and it'll update all of your tools for you automatically. So you have a module already added, it'll go and update those. So for folks that have internal repos, keeping all of your teams up to date with the latest tools, it works really well. I'll show you an example. If I can get my password right. Thank you, Tor. All right. So you run PTF. You can, again, get this from GitHub. It's very much a Metasploit type feel. I wanted to keep it similar to what we know as attackers for Metasploit. And so literally, when you're in PTF, you can type things like help to give you a little more information. But if I do show modules, not nodules, modules, it'll list all the different modules that are built in. And there's one here that I always use, which is modules/update all. So if I just go to here, and I copy and I say use that and then run it, it'll go through every single one of these tools that are built in here. Aircrack, Wi-Fi, Veil, PyIFSCAPE, NIC2, OpenVAS, Nmap, SET, SMB exec, SQL map, Impacket, Responder, you name it. There's a whole bunch of different tools in here that'll automatically go and package for you and install to you. And one of the biggest things that I missed, from Backtrack to Kali is the pentest directory. If you're familiar with Backtrack, you go to cd/pentest and you have your tool structure built in there. So PTF automatically builds that pentest structure for you and keeps things in the categories like wireless exploitation, exploitation, forensics, whatever it is the category. Now you have a set of tools that are automatically built into there, always up to date, that you can keep there. And to show you how easy the modules are, let's just do exploitation. I'll do set. In order to create a module, you literally just add a new file in that module directory path. So let's just say you want to do exploitation. It's an exploitation tool. You put it in there, the author of the module, the description of what the tool is, the install type, whether I'm doing get, svn, or file. File is just like a wget, type of thing. And then repository location, where the actual location of the tool is located at. What directory you want to put it in, SE toolkit. Dependencies. So for Debian, these are the specific dependencies. I only support Debian right now, but I'm working on Fedora, RPMs and things like that as well, so you'll be able to do those later. And then something called after commands. It's a thing that I built behind it because not every tool you can just check out and then all of a sudden it's installed. You have to run other commands to actually install it. So if you want, if there's other commands you have to run after you've downloaded it to go and actually install, you can run those afterwards to then finish the install path for that. So once it's installed and you're done, you just hit that update again, and it'll go through your tools again and make sure you have the latest and greatest version up to date and everything's all compiled and ready to go. So you can literally build your pen testing distributions or forensics tools or whatever you want to within a couple of seconds, granted if the module's there. If not, you can easily write it. So pretty simple, huh? Yeah? Yeah. No, anywhere you want to. Yep. Any host anywhere, anytime. It's already there. Yeah, it should be there. Yeah, it's there. Well, this module uses, but yeah. Can't make it that easy for you. Come on. Okay, I can add that, no problem. I thought I already had that in there. Probably coded it. It's probably in the repo. I just didn't check it in. Social Engineer Toolkit. I released 6.4 recently, and 6.4 was actually a really big release. I didn't include the ACA injection because it's not finished yet and didn't have airplane time. But I really recommend upgrading to 6.4 because I added some very big stability issues or fixes in for PowerShell injection. I found that when I was injecting into 64-bit platforms, it was working fine. However, on 32-bit platforms, it had a very good chance of crashing. So it was like half and half of whether or not it would work or not. Now it's 100% working on 32-bit platforms and 100% working on 64-bit platforms. So a lot of those code improvements, slim down injection types, slim down, so I can use the reverse HTTPS modules for Metasploit, as well as I restructured how the Etsy or how the config files are operating. If you know FSH compliance or normal distributions, your config files are supposed to live in Etsy, your user data and user user bin, and then everything from user, well, not user bin, but user share, and then user bin is your executables and launchers. So I restructured a lot of that, so the config files now live in Etsy toolkit, so it's more compliant with traditional packaging. But yeah, there's a lot of changes and improvements in set version 6.4. Highly recommend going download it. I released it yesterday. Set's a tough one because there's so many different attacks and it's attacking the user population. It really comes down to education awareness, network segmentation, and a lot of stuff that Ben talked about on mitigation detection. Talked about Unicorn, but for mitigation on Unicorn, what's interesting is if you're familiar with AppLocker, AppLocker actually allows you to disallow certain executables, more like an application whitelisting approach. And what you can actually do is you can disallow any type of PowerShell executions, like PowerShell.exe or anything that would call PowerShell, for normal users. So disallow PowerShell for normal users. It actually says normal users. So if you're not in an environment that doesn't have every user as a local admin, which is good practice, right? You can actually lock those down to where local users can't actually execute PowerShell if they're not administrator. So it actually stops the majority of these attacks that you'd see that I showed you today. One of the coolest tools that has ever been released, in my opinion, is being released at DEF CON. And it's going to be one of the talks that myself and Jeff Walton are going to be presenting on. Jeff is the brainchild behind this. It's so cool. I'm so excited about this one. Pivoter is, so one of the biggest challenges we have as pen testers is once we compromise a machine and we get access to it, right? More and more we're finding that they're up-to-date systems like Windows 8.1 or soon to be Windows 10 or Windows 7. privilege escalation is becoming much more difficult. To get access from a regular user account to an administrator account. Now, there's granted many ways of doing it, but if all of those fail, what do you have? Or how many times? Anybody here a pen tester? Yeah. How many times have you popped a machine and you're running as like a limited, Linux account like Apache, or a limited, iUser account for IIS? Many times, right? And so when you have those types of scenarios where you're running as a limited user account, tools like, Metasploit Pro, for example, where, it has the VPN capabilities in it, right? You can VPN into the environment. It requires you to have administrative level rights. And that's not necessarily going to happen because you have to have admin rights to hook into it. So if I'm running as a limited user, an IIS account or a network service account or whomever, I don't have the ability to run those type of VPN tools to pivot on that network. So normally for us pen testers, the way that we would break into a system is we'd have to find some sort of data on that machine that gave us more information to attack other systems. So, a web.config file that had SQL passwords, then we can use a SQL connection to connect to a backend database, and then from there use the XP command shell store procedure and attack other things, right? So there's a lot of different ways we could do it, but a lot of cases you don't find stuff. So you're limited in what you can do as far as an attack. So what Pivoter is a way for you to deploy a very small payload, I think it's like 14K, and it creates a reverse connection back to the attacker machine. It works on Linux and it works on Windows. So, if you compromise, Apache user running a limited user account, or you compromise an iUser or, a network service account, it works in those limited types of permissions, as well as a regular user, of course. And it establishes a reverse connection to your Kali machine that has, we call it a broker, the broker for handling the communications, and it VPNs your Kali box into their environment with limited permissions. So now you're VPN into their environment. Now you can move laterally across their entire environment and compromise anything you want to as an attacker. So we'll be releasing that at DEF CON. It's pretty sweet. Yeah. Mitigation on this, outbound connections, it's going to be a specific type of socket, connection that's going to communicate back and forth. It's all encrypted, but still, if you're allowing those types of ports out, you have to be really strict on egress filtering and what you allow, but hopefully stop something like this. Also, don't let your machines get popped, I guess. Token Hunter, Password Hunter. This is something that Larry Spawn did. He's one of our pen testers. And a lot of times when you compromise a machine, you get access to that machine, and from there you have admin rights, you escalate your permissions, and you have to move laterally in the environment to find somebody that has like a domain admin token, right? A lot of times you can find people that are in the administrative staff that have, connections, SSH connections, where you use something like Pagent to inject into and pull those SSH keys out and use that to connect to systems, or you're looking for a Kerberos token, or cache credentials or hashes of something that you want to get access to. So a lot of times you have to go and find where those specific systems are. So what Larry did is he released some code, and there's a blog post for it. And I'll give you the link for this in a second. But it's on the Trusted Sec site. If you just do Token Hunter, Trusted Sec, you'll find that at the blog post. But what it does is it's pure memory injection, where you can spray the network through the psexec command Metasploit module, and it gets sent through the entire infrastructure. And it uses invoke Mimikatz, which is something that Matthew Graber from the PowerSplit project came out with, that allows you to dump clear text memory passwords in memory, and then it automatically takes those passwords and posts them to a site for you that you can collect all those passwords for and the permissions. So you can find very, very quickly in the environment all the usernames, all the passwords in the environment that you have access to, and then from there make it easier for you to move to other systems and attack. So it's a really cool tool that he released, or code that he released for that, and so I definitely recommend going and checking that out. And interesting enough, I think we did the blog post, and I think like 3 or 4 days later, like Harmjoy saw it and coded it into Veil. I don't know what it is. I don't use Veil, but Power Up. He coded that into like Power Up a couple days later too, I think. So, I think it's in there as well. Mitigation for this, it's a tough one. Administrative level rights is one. There's actually a good tool that I'm going to be talking about here in a second called Ships, which is a defensive tool that would stop lateral movement into the environment. I'll talk about that in a second, and then I'll wrap up. But that's kind of the main method is not allowing lateral movement into the environment to get access to multiple systems. And then also clearing that password from memory. There's a patch for that specifically that you can apply from Microsoft that removes that once somebody's logged off. That's that undocumented feature in LSASS, the wdigest method. You can get rid of that. Has anybody here used Responder before? Responder is like the #1 most cheating tool for pen testers. It's like it magically just gives you credentials on a network. It's cheating. It's like it's too easy. And if you're not familiar with Responder, it's a tool that you can use that uses NBNS and LLM and MNR broadcast attacks. And what happens is your machine, when you go to a file share or whatnot, it'll first check your local system first to see if you have a record for that host name. If not, it sends a broadcast out to an entire local subnet saying, hey, where's this server located? Does anybody know? And what Responder does is it has a server saying, yeah, dude, I'm on the domain. I'm that dude. I got that name. That's me. That's cool. You can make it real quick where you don't have to query the domain controller. You can go directly to me. It's all set. And it's like, oh, you are? You're okay, cool. Here's my credentials. And just gives it to you, right? And now they're net NTLM v2 hashes, which are fine. You just run those through a cracker and you crack them. But it just gives it to you automatically, and now all of a sudden you have hashes on the network. So literally you run Responder and you just sit there and you're like, oh, there's some creds. All right, start cracking them. And then you move on, right? It's just like magic. It's cool. And you can also do basic auth attack too, where you can force users. Same thing for like browsers, for example, like Internet Explorer. I'll get to you in a second there. For browser exploitation, what you can do is your browsers, if you have that check mark in Internet Explorer saying automatically detect proxy settings, like which most do, your machine will actually broadcast out on the local subnet too, looking for those proxy settings for a wpad.dat file. And I'm like, yep, dude, I got your wpad.dat file right here. And it prompts them for username and password. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Boop, and it gives you the clear text username and password. So there's a couple of ways of messing with it, but Responder is a great tool for that. The major issue with that, though, is it's only Linux only. So you can only run that on a local machine that you have on that internal network that's Linux in order to go and run it, which gets fixed here in a second. But yeah, your question? Well, Yassinger is. I don't use Yassinger. Yeah. So Yassinger is like a hardware device that does wireless and does intercepting, like so it does hotspotting for more like SSID broadcasting. So like set up a hotspot based on a beacon packet that connects to it, and then you have somebody connect to you, and then it tries to harvest credentials and things like that too. It's more wireless based than this would be just directly on the network. Yeah, I haven't used Yassinger in a long time though, so I'm not really sure. But it's more wireless based. This is like I have a box on their network, and I'm using this to capture credentials like for like an internal type attack. Right.
This various non-DNS protocols and so forth, and then the machine goes, oh, you're looking for that? Hey, that's me.
And on the wireless side, if you're familiar, like you have like preferred networks that you've already connected to in the past. When you open your computer up, it goes through that list and it's like, hey, where's the Marriott? Hey, where's Starbucks? Hey, where's all the previous SSIDs that I've created before? And that's sending out what are called beacon packets to identify those wireless SSIDs. As the attacker, as a Yassinger or Hotspot or a few of the other ones that are out there, I think. Maybe Kismet does it too, or a few others. I'm not sure, but what it'll do is it'll set up an access point with that name, saying, "Oh yeah, dude, I'm the Hilton. Connect to me," and it connects, and then from there you can do man-in-the-middle attacks against the individual to go and target them. But so Responder itself, the tool itself, is Linux only, so that poses some sort of challenge for us if we compromise from the outside, right? Like let's just say we pop a Windows machine running as limited user account, or we pop a web server and we only have a Windows box to run off of. We can't just go and download Responder and then get additional hashes to compromise, can we? Well, we can now. Kevin Robinson released, and this is, again, Justin found this one. He released a tool called Envy, which is PowerShell-based Responder. So it's a native PowerShell Responder that you can actually use to do the Responder type attacks purely in PowerShell on Windows, which is phenomenal. So really cool method for exploitation, too, that's out there. Mitigation for Responder, you can turn off those requests in group policy to not locally broadcast. And I do recommend there's no reason for it. So within group policy, you can disable MBNS queries locally to local subnet ranges. So you disable those, and then from there you don't have, they're not going to actually make queries on actually mitigates Responder. Second issue with the wpad.dat file is the automatically detect proxy settings. You can either hard code exactly where it needs to go to for your proxy settings for when you're on the network, or just turn off that automatically detect proxy setting feature, and then that will mitigate the the Responder piece that you have out there for going after the basic authentication Internet Explorer attacks. So it's twofold things that you have to do. Now I talked a little bit about the blue team side. Now there's a tool that Jeff Walton, Jeff's a rockstar, man, killing it. Jeff released a tool recently called Ships, and it's funny, like when you write tools, like you have to come up with a cool name. So Jeff and I were going back and forth, and one of our guys, Alex Hammerstone, which is like one of the nicest guys in the world. Alex we were at Mexican, and he ate like 7 bags of chips as a bet, like big bags of chips. And then he ate his whole meal, then my meal on top of that. But he ate 7 bags of chips, so we're like, hey, let's call the new tool Chips in honor of Alex's feat of 7 different chips that he destroyed, right? So we ended up coming up with Chips. We couldn't come up with a cool acronym for Chips. So then we're like, well, maybe we should make it like Ships, and it could be like kind of piratey, like Irish, So we ended up changing the name to Ships, and we found a cool acronym for that. So that's kind of how our mindset goes when we come up with these things. for new tools. Like, it's just like, hey, it sounds kind of cool, so let's do it. But SHIP stands for the Shared Host Integrated Password Server. And it's an open source framework. It's Ruby based. And what happens from a post-exploitation perspective is when I compromise a system, and am I running over? Okay, got like 5 minutes. When I go and attack a system from a post-exploitation perspective, I compromise that machine, and then I get the credentials off of that system, and then I move laterally in the environment. So I compromise, one system. I grab the local admin hashes off of that, and then I move to the next system because the local admin hash is the same on one system as another, right? Or a server, same thing. What SHIPS does is anything that supports an HTTPS communication, so Linux, Windows, you name it, if you can do an HTTPS socket request, and we already wrote the connectors for you. What it'll do is you create a small scheduled task in group policy or your Linux machines or whatever, and what it does is however long you want the interval to be, if you want your passwords to rotate once a day, once every 2 days, once every 3 days, it goes and it calls out to the SHIPS server. The SHIPS server issues it over SSL a unique password that gets set on the machine, and so every password is unique on every single machine. Now, for administrators, let's just say I'm an admin, I need to get access to that workstation, to that server, I can log into SHIPS, and it uses LDAP integration in groups to query, and you can say, okay, well, I need to get access to this computer. Do I have rights to that? First of all, yes, I do. Okay, here's the password for that machine. Now I can log into it. So it gives you a way to centrally manage independent, unique, different passwords in your environment, and it rotates all those passwords real time, and it supports a lot of different operating systems to go and do it. It's really easy to install and implement and all that good stuff. There's an architecture framework for it, but anything that's going to allow an HTTPS communication, your laptops, your servers, everything else. And the new version of SHIPS that Jeff is releasing within the next few weeks actually allows you to do password vault storage as well. And what's interesting is the encryption that's used, you maintain the key on your machine, and that's it. It's never on the server. So you actually do the decryption on your machine, and the passwords themselves, so if I ever compromise the SHIPS server, all those passwords are encrypted with its own key strong cryptography. So none of those passwords can ever be compromised. You actually have to have the key in your individual environment. Now you can add multiple people to passwords based on LDAP integration, so they can all have keys. So you can access the same password for multiple systems, but at least gives you the ability to use randomized passwords as well as store your own passwords in a centralized environment. So that's SHIPS. It's kind of like the look and feel. It's got a nice little web interface and all that stuff. It looks pretty. The connectors again supports HTTPS, Linux, and Windows. Soon to come Cisco and things like that. Anybody have any questions? Sure. And all of our code is always at github.com/trustedsec. So all the tools that we've ever written are always up there. So SHIPS is up there, Artillery, which is a honeypotting defensive tool, Unicorn, Social Engineer Toolkit, all of those are up there. In fact, there's a thing that you can do to analyze, you compared to other companies, like in GitHub. And we're like the top 1% for Python development, and like on the little description thing, it says these people really need to learn other languages of Python. It's my preferred language. That's all. There's C in there. There's C. There's Ruby. There's other things, but we do a lot of development in there, so it's all to the community and open source. Any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.